If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, around the Delaware Valley, welcome to the Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky Show here on WWDB Talk 860. We've got a fantastic broadcast. We have Scott Fellmeth, who is a partner at Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky. Scott, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Joe. How you doing?
Well, I'm fantastic, man. And this is our debut on StreamYard, and I couldn't be happier than to have you on the broadcast. And so before we start, if you would, remind our listeners a little bit about yourself and your pathway to Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky.
Sure. So like you said, I'm a partner here at Saltz Mongeluzzi. I've been here for about almost 8 years now. I've been a licensed attorney for 10 years. Born and raised right outside of Philadelphia in Jenkintown, PA, right on the border of North Philly. I went to law school in Pittsburgh, actually. That's where my mom's from. I practiced out there for about a year doing personal injury. I really got a sense when I was in law school that I wanted to help people. I interned at the prosecutor's office out there. Criminal law wasn't for me, but then I also interned at another firm that did personal injury, and I really got a knack for it. I really loved it. I loved that I was helping people in their toughest times. I came back home to Philadelphia. I actually worked at a defense firm, quickly realized that was not for me. And then by chance, through working at that defense firm, I met Adam Pantana from my office, who a few months later was hiring. I got hired, and here I am.
And when we talk about personal injury for our listeners, okay, there's a long list there, okay? And at Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky, obviously the team is vast, incredible experts, and really, in a sense, unprecedented experience and resources. But if you would define for our listeners, okay, what the areas of personal injury.
Yeah, so we do pretty much everything. Our bread and butter is construction cases, construction accident cases, workplace accident cases. We do a lot of product liability cases, especially with industrial equipment. A lot of our clients are working in big industrial facilities. We have a medical malpractice group. We have a mass torts group. We have a group that primarily handles motor vehicle accidents and premises liability cases. So think a trip and fall on a sidewalk, something like that. But we do everything. Trucking, electrical burns. I just filed a propane explosion case a few days ago. So we really do anything, where someone's injured or killed in an accident at, the fault of somebody else.
And so you mentioned the teams, okay, and it is really interesting because you have individual teams that focus on roundaboutly, which is fast, but on specific areas. Talk about, you mentioned Adam Pantano. You're on Adam's team. Talk about your team and the scope of what you represent.
Sure, yeah. I'm on the Pantano team. There are 6 lawyers now on the team. So we're growing. It's Adam and 2 other partners, including myself. The other partner is Jordan Howell, who I think has been on the show, right, Joe? And we handle everything that comes our way. Construction, product liability, fire and explosion cases, electrical burn cases, trucking accidents. We'll handle those motor vehicle accidents if they're catastrophic. We'll handle a premises case if it's catastrophic, the workplace accidents, product liabilities, which, those are my favorite types of cases. And then, I know we talked about last show I was on, Adam and I kind of specialize in this very niche area, which is foster care and adoption abuse cases.
And we're going to talk about that's a big thing we're going to talk about on today's show. I want to point something out, though. This is really important. You see my background here? Okay, that is our treadmill, which doesn't get used that much, and I'm in my home office. But I just want to clear something up for our viewers. Scott is in the offices at Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky. That is not a formulated background. That's actually where you're sitting, correct?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
Yes,
So,
it's a pretty good view.
Yeah, and the reason that's important, okay, you're on the several floors on One Liberty Place,
Right.
and so the reason that is important is, and I'm talking to our viewers, is that they're having the resources. Okay, when somebody gets injured, okay, and you mentioned the word catastrophic, Scott. Okay, and that's an important word. Okay, and so what that means is, we're not talking about sprained ankles here. Okay, not that if you have a sprained ankle, it's not not an issue. I'm just saying that these are massive injuries and massive cases with catastrophic consequences and all those things. In order to represent a client properly, okay, you need to have the resources. And since you're dealing with insurance companies that often press down and push back on the little guy like myself and a lot of my friends in the trades who unfortunately get catastrophically injured or worse, the insurance companies often push back and bully those individuals. And and I'm going to ask Scott, having the resources and the team and the experience, okay, tell our listeners what that means and how important it is when you are representing somebody who was unjustly injured due to the negligence of others. Talk about the importance of those resources and what it's like when a defense firm comes up to your offices, because it's usually David and Goliath, but not in this situation.
When the defense attorneys come up to our office, they always take out their phones and they take pictures of the Philadelphia skyline. So that's pretty funny. But I'll tell you a story. Last week, I was referred a products liability case involving a minor who lost his arm by a fantastic attorney out in Pittsburgh. But that attorney has his own practice, and he knows that in order to prosecute this case and get the best result from the client, he needs our backing and needs our help to spend the money that he wouldn't be able to spend otherwise. And that's extremely important because personal injury lawsuits are very, very expensive. And we do spend lots of money to get the best results for our client. And the biggest thing I can tell you, Joe, is that if we have a case and I find an expert out there who is the leading expert in a particular field, and I go to Mongo or Larry and I say, listen, we got to hire this person. They're the best. They're charging $1,000 an hour. They've never said no because we have those resources, and Mongo and Larry have created this firm to allow the attorneys working here to get the best people to represent our clients.
And so when I think about that, so I think about somebody who's injured, the contingency fee agreement, okay? And it goes hand in hand with this situation. I'm looking at that view right there, and the first thing I'm thinking is, listening to yourself as an outstanding attorney, no way could I afford you, let alone Bob Mongeluzzi, Larry Bendesky, and everybody on the team. I could never afford that out of pocket. Those expenses you just talked about, I have no idea what they mean, but I know I can't afford them. Mm-hmm. What does that explain, about the contingency fee agreement? And when we talk about having the resources, we know the insurance company is going to bring somebody to try to push back on this?
Yeah. So every case we handle is on contingency, like you just said, Joe. And what that means is we don't charge an hourly fee. Our clients don't have to pay the costs in the case. We cover all of that. Our clients are never paying us any money. Our fee comes out of the end result in the case, whether that's a settlement or a verdict.
Okay. And so I have talked about it, and why it's so important to have the right attorney and the right firm is regular people, like myself, don't know. Sometimes you don't know the difference. Like in other words, you never had an attorney, so you're getting your cousin Kevin's friend Bob's, wife Marie, who might be a great attorney in the neighborhood, or she's a small boutique firm, and she's going to, give it a solid for you. But when it comes down to having to reach into their pocket to be able to invest in the experts they need that are credible, some, like you mentioned, some of these experts are incredibly, they are incredibly important, and they are incredibly expensive. And so, Kevin's cousin, friend's wife may not be able to afford that. So they are not going to be able to likely pay for that individual. Well, since I can't afford to do it, it's important that the firm never makes a decision based on not having the resources. You make the decision based on the need for the client, because you have the resources to pay for those experts, correct?
Correct. I mean, yeah, what we do is in the best interest of the client, because that's our main job. That's what we have to follow in every single case. And just so the listeners are aware, when we're talking experts and doctors, those are things you need in every single personal injury case, because at the end of the case, at the end of discovery, you have to present the other side with all of these expert reports that show the client's injuries, that show that the accident caused these injuries, what the future diagnosis is, what the future prognosis is, what the future medical care is going to cost, and what the client can or cannot do after this accident given their injuries. So you need to have the best people to show the other side that this is a serious case, a life-changing case for this person.
And when we talk about the cost, bottom line, there's no out-of-pocket cost to retain the best lawyers on the planet, and that's what they call the great equalizer. That's why the little guy like myself has a chance against an otherwise Goliath who can push and mess with me left and right. I've had this conversation, but when I talk about Saltz Mongeluzzi, I'm proud, obviously, to do the broadcast, because it's a different ball game when Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky walks in the room. They know that there's the resources, but you are not going to fold in the face of, the big bad wolf. And so that's incredibly important. We've talked about it many times, but now we're talking about it on video. And so, Scott, let's kind of get into the topic at hand, okay? And it's a very difficult topic. When we talk about catastrophic injuries, okay, and personal injuries, when you talk about, massive construction accidents, you mentioned the list of what entails in personal injury, okay, and product liability, okay, construction accidents, massive construction accidents, auto accidents, trucking accidents. That is the stereo, like you would think, that's stereotypical. Those are the main areas, okay. But and medical malpractice, which, by the way, 1 million firms advertise it.
Right.
They refer it out to firms like Saltz Mongeluzzi, okay, and that is something I can't, just skip over, okay. The amount of referrals that you get, cases, okay, from those smaller firms that maybe, and by the way, they may be good firms, they just don't have the resources, but they'll send them to you guys, Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky, to represent the case. Just touch on that for a second, if you will.
Yeah, the our attorney referral network is a big part of how we get cases. You know, I'm lucky enough to have attorneys practicing in my field that will send me cases because they believe in my abilities and my firm's abilities, and what we can do for their clients, and that's the biggest compliment. But you're right. A lot of the firms that you see that are advertising on I-95, on those billboards, or on buses, on wherever you see a firm advertising, chances are, if it's a catastrophic case, it's coming our way.
And that is incredibly important. One of the things I want to point out before we get into the area we're going to get in is, aside from a lot of those things that we just talked about, having the resources, big firm and all that, it is but make no mistake about it, this is a small firm environment. Okay, when I walk into the law firm to do the broadcasts, the all-star team, the world-renowned attorneys that you have, including yourself, treat the client like you've known them your whole life. So you're not walking into a situation, and I'm painting a picture to everybody, the culture at the firm. Okay, the importance of treating that client, okay, like it's somebody you've known your whole life, okay, and not with the airs that like you would see on TV or something like that, the stereotypical Harvard law firm. By the way, you may have Harvard lawyers, but across the board, talking to and having that client attorney relationship, and that goes for the team also, because the topic we're going to talk about today, that is a part of personal injury that is not stereotypically a part of it, and that I really, when I first learned about it, was very emotional topic. The love and care and personal touch that each one of your team members has is really a small firm personal feel. Talk about that. People understand that comfortability is a priority.
Yeah. Every one of my clients has my cell phone number. A client of mine texted me this morning on my way into the office. I called her. She just wanted to chat about the case and see where we are. I mentioned, Joe, last show I was on with you, that I represent a lot of undocumented workers. Every single undocumented client that I have, I am on a group chat with them with a interpreter. And that's so that they feel comfortable and they can have communication with me at any point in time for whatever concern they may have. We are accessible. We need to be accessible in order to represent our clients to the full extent. And we need to get to know our clients to represent them to the full extent. And that's what we do.
You mentioned the undocumented workers. We had the show last month about it. It's a fascinating area. I'm a labor guy, and almost nobody gets taken advantage of more than that community. Okay,
Correct.
We're not going to get completely into it, but the trust factor there.
Yeah.
Okay? If you're representing that community, who in many ways these get lured to America through predatory companies, okay, and then work in horrible conditions because a lot of these predatory companies know that they're undocumented and can't say anything. Okay, the trust factor there is at the utmost. Just touch on that for a second before we.
Yeah. So what's really interesting too is it's not just the trust factor of them being here, undocumented, which is obviously a huge issue with the current administration in our country, but culturally as well, there's trust issues. I have a lot of clients from Brazil where it wasn't a democracy not too long ago, and a lot of clients from Central America where, again, there was dictators in their country not too long ago. So not only is it just a trust factor when they're here undocumented, but also culturally, you have to get over that hump. So when I first meet with my undocumented clients, they need to see my face, have to see my face. I just can't be a voice on the phone. So I try to do as many in-person meetings as I can. If that's difficult for them, then we'll do a Zoom, which is a great thing, right? But they have to see my face. They have to know who they're working with. And the first 20 minutes of that initial meeting is developing that trust, letting them know who I am, that I'm on their side. I have their best interests in mind through all of this.
Absolutely. And in those situations, and when this is not an immigration show, but I would say this, a lot of these jobs are jobs that are hard to fill. Okay. Number one, that these individuals, are doing, okay, under really treacherous situations many times. But also the fact that, and I'll jump on here, they should have visas for jobs that are Americans, American businesses have a hard time, filling. And that's just my 2 cents. But anyway, having said that, okay, let's talk about, our primary topic at hand. Okay, because, one of the things that you would not think of a lot of times, okay, when you're talking about personal injury cases, okay, foster and adoption abuse cases, okay, and I remember when I first heard about these types of cases, I thought they were criminal cases, okay, and but they're also civil cases, okay, and they're emotional, and they are something that that you do on a daily basis, okay, and you, what everything we just talked about, from the undocumented, of course, the I hate to say it, standard type of personal injury cases, because nothing's standard, but this particular area, also the foster and adoption abuse cases, you're talking about, okay, and I mentioned the predatory contractors and all, people being taken advantage of. Well, these are they're vulnerable people. Well, here we go. Okay, you want to talk about vulnerable people? Let's talk about children. Okay, and by the way, even adults that are no longer children, that were abused years ago in systems that were set up, by somebody who allowed it to be set up. But
Correct.
Let's start by saying, okay, what is tell our listeners from a civil standpoint, but it overlaps with criminal. I mean, but from a civil standpoint, what is an adoption and a foster care abuse case?
Sure, and you're right. I mean, it deals with not a vulnerable population, the most vulnerable population in our country, right? These are kids in the foster care system, or kids who were adopted by a family. And when children are in those systems, there are certain entities that are supposed to provide oversight for them with the family that they're placed in. There's a lot of vetting that's supposed to be done. There are weekly, bi-weekly inspections and meetings with the child, with the foster parents or the parents who adopted the child. There's so many things that these entities are required to do, and a lot of them are, laws, regulations that you can pull up and look at. But the way it breaks down is every county in Pennsylvania has a children and youth services agency. So that agency is supposed to be responsible. Unfortunately, those agencies are extremely underfunded and understaffed. So what they do is they contract with private entities all throughout the Commonwealth to perform those functions, right? To perform that oversight, to perform those safety evaluations, to look out for the health and safety of these kids within the system. Unfortunately, what we see all the time, and I've always had a foster and adoption abuse case that I'm working on ever since my time at Saltz Mongeluzzi. So it's so common, it's so sad. These private entities aren't doing what they agreed to do, and it leads to all sorts of things. It can lead to just systematic sexual abuse of a child. It can lead to physical abuse, emotional abuse. It can lead to death, which I've handled a few cases that actually resulted in the death of the child. It's emotionally charged cases. They're very difficult cases because there's all of these laws that go into it. There's confidentiality issues that you have to address, and it's extremely difficult to get through, especially because I have 3 children of my own. But they are cases that are extremely important for the child or the adult, if they're an adult now, or the estate of the child who unfortunately passed away due to the negligent or reckless conduct of the defendants.
Okay, so
that was a lot to unpack there. I apologize.
Well, I just want to say something. Don't apologize, Scott. And I want to thank you for doing, for representing these, because I'm having a hard time. We've been touching on this conversation for less than 5 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Just thinking about it, okay, almost brings me to tears. And so, having said that, okay, and we got a couple minutes to the break, and we're gonna get into all the hard details after the break. But in fact, you know what? Let's do this, and I'm talking to our producer because I don't want to get into this and then have to go to break and then come back to it. Let's take a break, okay, and then we'll come back and have a conversation with Scott Fellmeth on the abuse cases. Okay, we're going to have more from the Saltz Mongeluzzi and Bendesky show, and our guest Scott Fellmeth in just a minute.
If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.
Welcome back to the Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky show here on WWDB Talk 860. Our guest is Scott Fellmeth, partner at Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky, and we're talking about a very sensitive area of the law, okay, and really just in part of our society, and that is, and a lot of people would not think that they are personal injury cases. But they're a different type of personal injury case, a very specialized area that takes a very special person to represent them. We're talking about foster and adoption abuse cases. Okay, where the most, like Scott said in the first segment, the most vulnerable, okay, in society are put in unthinkable situations. Okay, having said that, Scott, when you set it up for me, the conversation, okay. Just even to talk, because I have kids too, and like you and I talked about this before. You have 3 kids, so I'd like to ask you, before as you get into this process, and I say this a lot in different areas, but this guy, as an attorney, somebody who's a professional, and we talk about the culture at the firm and all those things, and I don't know what it's like. Somebody could be real smart, go to law school, but sitting in front of a family who's just lost somebody, or somebody who's catastrophically injured, that's not ever going to recover, or lost a limb. And at Saltz Mongeluzzi, we're talking about, when we talk about catastrophic injuries, and we were union, I was a union iron worker. My dad ran the union, and so we of course we got some sprained ankles and some strained shoulders, but for the most part, we're working on high-rise buildings, including the one you're in. They're catastrophic injuries. and as an attorney, you not only have to be great at what you do and have the resources and all that, but I don't know what it's like to sit in a room knowing all day long, the night before, and maybe a couple of days before that, that a family was coming in who just lost a loved one, or that an individual who just lost an arm. And I had the pleasure of meeting a gentleman when we inducted Bob Mongeluzzi and Larry Bendesky into the Legends of Labor Hall of Fame, who lost both his arms.
That's right. I remember that. Right.
Okay. He was an incredible, and he had his prosthetics on. He met his family, great people, and his spirits were really lifted. You know why? Because he was sitting in front. You know, he saw who in front of him was representing him, and he knew he wasn't alone. But right. I don't know what it's like to sit in that office with you guys and all your partners when that family comes in, okay? And how painful it must be, okay? Bob Mongeluzzi, an internationally acclaimed, maybe the best personal injury trial lawyer on the planet, but when you meet him, it's like you've known him your whole life, okay? Let's talk about it in this area, Scott. How do you, with 3 kids, okay, family man, okay, how do you, at the onset of this case, prepare yourself emotionally? Okay, and I know you're a motivated guy, so I know this must motivate you and tick you off to the end of the earth. But and that's, you know, your motivation is standing right in front of you. But how do you prepare yourself emotionally, you know, to meet these people, right, okay, and to hear these stories that actually happen to somebody who's 2 feet in front of you?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, you really can't prepare yourself for it, especially when it involves a child and you're a parent. So yeah, like you said, Joe, I have 3 kids under the age of 6. And when a case comes in involving, you know, a child, whether it's physical abuse, you know, someone's, you know, burning the kid with cigarettes or something, which actually happens in this world, or, you know, the child is brutally raped and murdered, which is another case that we handled, and I would like to talk about that case in a bit, but it's you can't prepare yourself for that. But because you do have the background, and every attorney here is just a regular person, right, who has and understands that all of our clients are going through a extremely difficult time, the worst time in their lives. They're going through extreme pain and suffering. You know, we're regular human beings who understand that, you know, we need to be compassionate with our clients. You know, we try as best we can to get in their shoes, to figure out, you know, how they're doing. But when I see injuries or sexual abuse or the deaths of children as a father, that's all the motivation I need.
And let's talk about how, and we're going to get into the cases. How prevalent are these cases? You know, people, you know, may not know how common they are.
Yeah.
And do they? And in today's day and age, okay, because firms like yourself keep agencies accountable, okay, because otherwise, you know, they're running roughshod, even, you know, more than it happens. But what's the, you know, where are we when it comes to how common these cases are?
They're so common. And it's, you know, because of a number of reasons. You know, it's not just because there are bad apples out there. I mean, the agencies that are required to provide oversight of this vulnerable population just can't do it. You know, with, you know, the money that's flowing to them and the lack of staffing. And that's why they contracted out to those private companies that I told you about. So, you know, with those private companies, they don't have the expertise to do it. They don't properly train their personnel. They don't properly vet the parents where these kids are being placed. They don't pick up on the warning signs. We have a case right now where we represent 2 adult women, their sisters, who were placed with a foster family, and they were just sexually abused for years. And all throughout the records of the agency in charge of overseeing these 2 little girls, there was just red flag after red flag. And all these people in the foster care and adoption system are mandated reporters, right? They have a duty and requirement to report suspected child abuse. And that's not a high bar to meet. And there's no downside to reporting it. The system's set up where even if you're wrong, that person who reported, they can't be criminally or civilly held liable at all. That's for the protection of the children.
Right.
Right.
You mean the person who reports it? The person who reports it.
The person who reports it, correct. So we see it in every case. And I'd like to tell you about the Grace Packer case if I can.
Please.
So, and this case was one that I worked on pretty early on when I got to Saltz Mongeluzzi. And it's a case that I can talk freely about, except I can't name the defendants, but we have a pretty loose confidentiality with the settlement with the defense in this case. But Grace was a child who her parents lost their parental rights early on, and she was placed into foster care of a couple named Sarah and David Packer. A few years after she was placed, David Packer was criminally charged with sexually abusing her and another child. Now, that in itself is a terrible, terrible thing. What's even worse is during that investigation, it was alleged, maybe not proven, but that the foster mom knew about this abuse while it was happening. Guess what happened, Joe? Grace remained in the care of that foster mom, which is outrageous to begin with.
Unimaginable.
So, insane. So, Grace remains with the foster mom. At that point, actually, she was formally adopted. So they let the adoption go through. Mom gets a boyfriend. His name was Jacob Sullivan. There was just systematic abuse going on in that home. There was red flags, in all of her records. She actually was in and out of behavioral health facilities because she was obviously dealing with all of these issues and developing her own issues. And at those facilities, again, red flags left and right. But what do they do time and time again? They send her back to live with mom and boyfriend, who are just abusing her and abusing her and abusing her. Eventually, what happened to this little girl is the mom and boyfriend developed a rape murder fantasy. And they eventually one night brought her to a home that they rented, and they raped her. They left her there in the attic. It was in July, so it was extremely hot. They came back. Grace remarkably was still alive after being raped, strangled, and left in this attic. The boyfriend raped her again, and then they killed her. And that wasn't enough for these people. What they did was then they dismembered her body and they scattered it throughout the Pocono area. I think it was Luzerne County, if I remember correctly. So this little girl, Grace Packer, and anyone can Google her. It was local news. It might have been national news. I don't remember, but she was with foster parents who turned into the adoptive parents, and then the mom and then boyfriend for over a decade. And that was a decade of abuse. That was a decade of multiple entities, and these are private entities. These aren't the governmental entities that we're kind of overseeing, because it was all contracted out to these private entities who just missed red flag after red flag, missed mom saying that she wants nothing to do with this child anymore, but they kept giving her back, missed clear signs of neglect and abuse, and eventually she was raped and murdered. And we represented Grace's younger brother, who obviously was a minor, so there was a court appointed guardian, but her younger brother was with her through this entire course. So, you know, we got an outstanding result. You know, globally, we settled the case for almost 8 figures. And that money is put into a trust for Grace's younger brother. So he is, you know, set for life, because the horrors that he saw, you know, throughout that time, when he was living with the adoptive parents and Grace, it's unimaginable. And it's obviously unimaginable what Grace went through as this little girl. But that was one of the first cases, adoption and foster care cases, that Adam Pantano and I worked on. And it has stuck with me ever since. And it's motivation to hold these entities responsible for, you know, their failures and the responsibilities that they agree to for this vulnerable population. So sorry, that went on for quite a while, but it's important for me to tell her story still.
Oh, there are no damn words. There is no way I can adequately, you know, what kind of system? And I can, first of all, God rest her soul.
Yeah.
And on a human side, please tell me those people are in jail for the rest of their lives.
Yeah. So I actually deposed the mom in jail over the course of multiple days. Boyfriend died in jail before we could depose him.
Hopefully it wasn't from natural causes, but that's just me speaking.
I think it was. But he died in jail. Mom is still alive. Mom has a life sentence. She's never going anywhere. But yeah, I met the mom and deposed her, and yeah, it's terrible stuff.
And having said that, and I'll do the best I can. First of all, I want to thank you for representing the young boy, okay, and God bless him. And again, God rest the soul of Grace.
Yeah.
What kind of system? Okay, interesting. I think we had this. I'm not sure if you and I had this conversation, but the system is my next question. But I don't know if you know Councilman David O. You know David?
Yeah, I know of him. I don't know him personally, but yeah, I hear him in the news and everything.
Well, I know him really, really well. David has taught David's one of the great human beings of all time. Okay. And he's a Republican and I'm a Democrat. So that really must mean he's a good, that'll tell you what kind of great guy he is. I'm being sarcastic, but David does martial arts, and he was training his child. And I don't know if I told you this, but he was a city councilman at the time. He ran for mayor against Shaw Parker, both great people. But he was training his child and to do a flip, and the kid hit his shoulder. So he says to his wife, "I'm going to take him over to Penn." I think it was Penn. No, it wasn't Penn. It was another institution. And he gets to the institution. Okay. Well, unbeknownst to him, they looked at the child, and the receptionist thought that it might look like abuse. So David's in the waiting room. That was the opposite of what happened to those children. Okay. And I talk about a system that is screwed up like there's no tomorrow.
Right.
They told David that there was that they already called I guess DHS, and there was no due diligence. Okay, now they didn't realize, and it shouldn't matter, that he was and David didn't realize the system was that screwed up, so we delved in it heavy. Okay, they did, and so and then once and the kids with no due diligence could have got stuck in a system that took them right down the path that you're talking about right there. Now it's a little different situation, but even at the highest level, like he immediately delved. It was on the news and all that. And David, he went into a major research and all those things. Okay, but because he was able to, but still, it was hard for him to navigate. I think he even said he got threatened, for crying out loud. You don't want to go down it. Now that is a city agency, okay? And he was able to get in there and see some of the injustices. Where are we, Scott, when you talk about these red flags at a level, okay, that you guys represented that little girl, okay, where she got stuck into a system, okay, that continued her abuse at the highest level? Where are the faults in that? Where did you find it? Okay, where's the disconnect? Okay, where something like this could possibly happen, because you obviously kept those people accountable and in a civil sense. But where did you find the disconnect was, and how can we improve it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to be honest, I wish Grace presented it at Penn or CHOP, because it sounds like they are, quick to follow the mandated reporter law and contact the authorities. But it's a lack of training. It's a lack of oversight. Could be a case manager who has too many children on his or her case list. Could be a psychologist or psychiatrist who just is running through the treatment of a child and not really looking at the notes that he or she are creating and what the child is telling them. I can't tell you how many different cases we've seen where the child's actually saying, I was sexually abused, or they're doing this to me, they're doing X, and the one case I told you where we represented two adult women, the older sister literally said, I'm being sexually abused, and that's written in the documents of one of the defendants that we sued. And guess what they did? They called her a liar. They literally wrote in their assessment, she lies very well. So that's kind of what you're dealing with. You're dealing with people and entities that would rather call a young innocent child a liar than follow their statutory duties and contact. It's called Childline. That's where you make the report. Contact Childline to get that investigation started. So it's a number of things. I mean, what's the answer? I don't know. More funding, more training, more accountability in civil lawsuits. I mean, because what happens is, their insurance company, pays money on their behalf, but do they make any changes? Sometimes. Sometimes that they're required to, if, let's say DHS or another governmental entity comes in and investigates, sometimes, but a lot of times, no.
Scott, let me ask you, okay, who normally is the contact to the firm? Okay, and a couple things. Number one, is it confidential when they call the firm? Okay, is there any out-of-pocket costs that the victims ensue in the process, or is it a contingency fee agreement? as we talked about before. What can people do, obviously, to contact the firm to be heard? Maybe the system isn't listening to them, but you are. And you are one of the entities that the system's afraid of because you keep them accountable.
Yeah.
Talk about that, the confidentiality part of it, and who typically calls you when these things happen.
Yeah, and I will say that one good thing that has come out of, the Catholic Church scandals, the other, I don't know, the Michigan, if you remember Michigan State, Larry Nassar, right?
Right.
So, and there was kind of that, groundswell, that movement, the statute for filing civil claims was extended. So, people, who were abused, typically what happens if you're abused as a child, a few years ago or earlier, once you turn 18, then you have 2 years to file that lawsuit. That's not the case anymore. You have much greater amount of time. I believe now it's 35 years after you've turned 18 in Pennsylvania. Jersey's a little bit longer. I believe you have until you're 55 or 55 years. So that's a good thing that came out of it. Confidentiality, of course, always confidential. Even when we file a lawsuit, if the person is still alive and they're a sexual abuse survivor or victim, we don't use their name. We use their initials, or we just do a Jane Doe designation, or John Doe designation. So it's strictly confidential. Even if you choose to file a lawsuit, that is complete confidential. It's never going to get out your real name. And yes, all contingency fee. That's all we do. And in terms of people who call us about these cases, it could be the referring attorney, it could be the family themselves. It all depends. It's case specific, Joe.
When somebody calls and we talk about the culture of the firm, this could be the hardest call they ever make. Specifically, if it's an adult male or female, obviously it's an adult and they've been struggling their entire life with this. Okay. Talk about the culture at the firm. Obviously, you and your partners are incredibly caring, sensitive individuals.
Yeah.
I don't know how you learn this in damn law school. This takes a special person. But talk about, because people are probably afraid to pick that phone up. I want them to know what they can expect when they do.
Yeah. So, Adam Pantano and I, we deal with the foster and adoption abuse cases. We have another sexual abuse team. That's all they do. I believe they're all former prosecutors in the sexual abuse unit of, Philadelphia or Collier County's district attorney's office. So, they're experts in it, and they've been dealing with victims their entire careers. It's something that is extremely uncomfortable to confront and deal with and talk about, but you have to do it because what these individuals went through is just, you can't even imagine. So
it's in
yeah.
And I want to, for the record, a lot of these cases are, we talk about abuse and foster care. They also include, you talk about civil sexual assault, civil abuse, when institutions like the Glen Mills situation, like a lot of the schools that have Catholic Church, for crying out loud, and a number of areas where they put children, they did not, when they hired somebody, they may not have done a background check. In other words, they put vulnerable individuals in terrible positions, and as a result, their lives were destroyed, and they were abused sexually, mentally, emotionally, physically. Is that accurate?
Yeah. And I should mention, it's not all sexual abuse cases like the two I mentioned. We represented the family of a little boy who drowned on a foster parent's property because they didn't have the correct protections around this pond that they're supposed to, under Pennsylvania regulations and also the regulations that this private entity that was overseeing his foster care had in place. They went to the property, they didn't do a proper inspection, and they let this body of water just sit there. And this almost 2-year-old little boy just went in because his favorite ball went in there, and he drowned. So that one might have been the hardest, because I think my second son was just the same age when that case came in. So that was very, very, very difficult to deal with.
I can't even imagine. And we have got about 15 seconds left, but we're also talking about physical abuse. If somebody was beaten and
Correct.
Just terrible things. Well, listen, Scott, I can't thank you enough, obviously, for obviously being on the show, but also for what you do for the most vulnerable populations. Okay, you are the accountability. Okay, and so I want to thank you, and obviously everybody at the firm, for doing what is due on behalf of the vulnerable and those who've been injured in many ways due to the negligence of others. So I want to thank you for being on the show, my friend.
Of course. Thanks for having me, Joe.
It's my pleasure. I want to thank everybody for tuning in to the Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky show here on WWDB Talk 860. I want to thank everybody at the firm for making the show happen. And of course, our guest, Scott Fellmeth, partner at Saltz Mongeluzzi Bendesky. On behalf of Scott, I'm Joe Dougherty. Thanks for listening, everybody.
If you own a company and you're not producing a podcast, you're missing out. The public consumes messaging when they're ready. Join the professional podcast network of companies and let Jacob Media Partners put you in the podcast arena. Come to our professional studio, or we'll come to your place of business and professionally produce your company podcast. Call Jacob Media right now at 267-261-3428. 267-261-3428.